So here's another short sutta excerpt from Anguttara Nikaya 1, Book of Ones, 576 to 582. It's about the mindfulness, recollectedness of the body. Kind of sati. So one thing, because when developed and cultivated, leads to great anxiety, leads to great welfare, leads to great security from bondage, leads to mindfulness and awareness, leads to acquisition of knowledge and vision, and leads to pleasant dwelling here and now, leads to realization of the fruit of knowledge and liberation. Which one thing? Mindfulness of the body. This because is the one thing that which when developed and cultivated leads to great anxiety, great welfare, great security from bondage, and so on. So you might wonder here why it says great anxiety, great concern. It refers to when you start recognizing kind of the necessary preconditions, such as the certain recognition of the inevitability of suffering, for example, and then that the fact that you are not you're liable, you're subjected to sickness, aging, and death. All these things that can befall one's body, they would affect and sometimes even undermine your own life. You remain completely liable to those things. So most people live their life completely ignoring that. That's why when the Buddha went out of his palace, he referred to things he's seen as divine messengers. They were basically conveying a message of a certain reality that awaits every human, yet most of the people manage to sort of spend their life pretty much covering their very reality up. So the first thing is going to happen if you start practicing mindfulness of the body correctly is you're going to experience anxiety, because suddenly you're rediscovering that the fact that you're out there in the world, you're liable to these things, you're not in control, and like to circumstances, elements, you're fully subjected to it. You're like, as the Buddha said in another sutta, you're like a flayed cow that's being consumed by, if it leans on the wall for support, it gets eaten by the insects that are on the wall. If it lays down for support, it gets eaten by the insects they're living on the ground. If it stands, the one that live in the air, and so on. So attending to the maintaining that mindfulness of the body correctly, the recollectedness of the pretty much of the nature of the body, which is the nature of that, being subjected to illness, being subjected to things that are that you cannot possibly foresee. So having that on the back of your mind as a certain context that you cultivate will have to result in anxiety, initially at least, because the anxiety, it's a symptom of that cover-up. If you haven't been covering a certain reality up in regard to things you are liable to, you wouldn't be anxious about it. So anxiety is that sort of a crack in that plaster that you have applied on the certain aspects of existence that you refuse to admit to yourself because they are far too unpleasant. So in this sutta, in particular, it says that if you were to cultivate then that mindfulness properly, it will lead to great anxiety, more like a great concern, a recognition of great concern, which is pretty much a necessary step for you to look for the way out. If you don't experience that concern, or as the Buddha would say, or even try and invoke in monks that got complacent and lazy, a sense of urgency. So you need to recognize that time might be short. Your entire life, the way you know it, things that are dear to you, things that are not dear to you, everything, your preferences, your sense desires, things that you go through on a daily basis, all of that is there undermined by the nature of the body that you are not in control of. So you could think of it in terms of like you're closed in a vehicle, in a car that is running down the hill and there are no brakes, or maybe brakes work like in a limited manner, let's say like that, to be a bit more accurate. So you can slow down or not, but you cannot completely stop. It's impossible. You can you can steer to the left, you can steer to the right, you can choose the direction, but one thing you cannot do is stop going downhill. So that's pretty much the human existence, the life we are kind of living and leading. It's all heading in that certain direction, and there's nothing you can do about it. But most of the people and the minds that are not untrained, they are unable to bear that recognition that you are heading downhill one way or the other. It doesn't matter how good, how great your life might be. Death is inevitable, aging is inevitable, sickness is inevitable. So if you were to not lose the sight of this context, well, there are many things then that you would not do in this life. Like you would not take for granted your own senses, the pleasure you get from your own senses. You would not take for granted irritation and ill will. You wouldn't be acting out of it. That's what Buddha said in, or maybe it wasn't the Buddha, but it was in the Dhammapada. It was said that people who quarrel and bear grudges, I'm kind of paraphrasing, people who quarrel and bear grudges are the ones that forget that in this world we are all condemned to die. As in, if you were to not forget the ultimate, the direction that vehicle, car, is heading, it would be impossible for you to bear a grudge. So whenever you find yourself bearing grudges or ill will or chasing sensuality, that can only be done on a basis of ignoring the fact that you are liable to death, and that death is inevitable. That's why one of the chief of the mindfulness that you can practice is mindfulness of death, which is closely, obviously, it's inseparable from mindfulness of the body. It results in the same recognitions. So that's how it would lead to great anxiety, the useful anxiety, the anxiety that can then reveal the cover-up. And because of that, you seek your own welfare. If you keep doing it, you'll stop feeling anxious because you stop covering it up. So then it will lead to your great welfare. Then, furthermore, it will lead to the security from bondage. In this particular meaning is security from bondage, basically things that bind you are things that you find dear and pleasing to you. So they don't bind you directly, so to speak. So it's not the fault of the things that you are bound by them. It's the fault of you valuing the pleasure that you get through those things. Thus, those things become your bond. So if you were to uproot the value of pleasure, you have severed the bond. And you would do that if you practice, if you maintain that recollectedness of the context of your body correctly. And when I say the body, I don't mean sensations of your body and so on that you might be attending to. It means context of the body, the nature of the body. What is the body liable to? What are the characteristics of the body? What are the implications of having body? Well, it's liability to sickness, aging and death. Liability to elements, having to endure them. Liability to hot, cold, abusive experiences, words that are unpleasant to hear. Basically, being devoured by the senses and pressured by the senses. That is the nature of the body. So when we say mindfulness of the body or recollectedness of the body, that is what you must keep recollected and be mindful of. Not I'm touching my feeling, I'm feeling things in my back. None of that is actually stands for the body, nor is it even a recollectedness of the body. Just literally focusing on the tactile aspects of your present experience as a whole. That's why often people misconstrue the whole idea of sensations as somehow they're feeling. They're not. Sensations that you observe throughout your body are basically tactile, like your attention following the tactile directions. That's it. So on account of touch, you somehow can become an arahant. Impossible. Mindfulness of the body means body as a unit, body as a whole. Things that, regardless of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, things that you are liable to, which is sickness, aging, death, non-control, impermanence, all of that. So that's why by severing that bondage, it would lead to that establishment of composure, of samadhi, through that mindfulness and awareness, which then leads to like thoroughly, completely uncovering anything you've been covering up, freeing yourself from the contradictions of desires, ill will, and so on, leads to the acquisition of knowledge and vision, which leads to pleasant abiding right here, right now. As in, pleasant abiding means ease. You're free from bondage, free from pressure, free from anxiety. Means you're at ease. You've laid down the burden. You're completely free, which is exactly what leads then to realization of the fruit of that knowledge and liberation, arahantship. So that in that sense, like if you practice mindfulness of the body, and also you can see how it would then result in knowledge, because it's not just a random technique that you're observing your body, how it moves or how it sits. No, you're dwelling on the aspects of the body that kind of, certainly direct, and they signify your whole life. Like, if you're ignoring that you're liable to sickness, aging, and death, that is your context. Like ignoring the certain truths. So that's why you would commit to various things in life, be bound by them, chase them, obviously implying that they will last forever, ignoring the fact that they can't. So that's a direct result of you not having the proper context of your body. So if on the other hand you were to change the background of that context, and start dwelling on things that are that the body is liable to, then that will have to then shape your other decisions on a smaller scale. You will not possibly make careless choices and decisions out of the careful context. It's impossible. That's why context is all. Like mindfulness is fundamentally what context is. Practicing mindfulness is practicing the clarification of the context. And that's why you can't have too much of that. You can't be too clear about the context that you are liable to, the context of your existence. You can have too much focusing, you can have too much of non-focusing, be too slack, but you cannot have too much of clarity in regard to the context of your body. It's just impossible. And the clearer you are, the more of that knowledge and recognition gets established, and the more of the proper samadhi you develop. Because now your samadhi is unshakable, because the recognition of what the nature of the body is, you cannot forget. Because how could you forget? Because any experience you have is within these five senses, and the mind, of course. So it's within the body, strictly speaking. And that's what Buddha meant. The body is the universe for you. There is nothing outside that you could perceive or even conceive. So the extent of the universe is the extent of the body. The entire universe is contained in this body less than 2 meters tall, as the Buddha said it. So if you were to clarify the context of that universe, the certain characteristics of impermanence, characteristics of that lack of satisfaction, you would not be able to basically maintain all the things that depend upon those characteristics not being clarified, such as sensuality, ill will, anger, carelessness, indolence, and pretty much everything else that's by definition unwholesome.